All right, so let's talk about division. What we have here, for instance, we put a 24, and we put it under this division symbol here, and we're dividing by 8. This is how we actually are going to solve the problem, but what you might see written on your test is you might see something like 24 divided by 8. What you're trying to see is how many times can 8 go into 24? The first thing you need to realize for this very simple problem that I'm starting out with is that 24 divided by 8 goes an even number of times because you know that 8 times 3 is 24. You should know that. So 8 can go into 24 exactly 3 times. So for this problem, you can just write the answer down. But we're going to start to learn to use this method here because for bigger problems that you can't just figure out in your head, you're going to have to use that long division way here. So let me show you how to do it for this simple problem here. You're trying to figure out how many times 8 will go into 24 and divide into it. All right? So the first thing you do is you say, can 8 go into 2? You look at the first digit first. Can 8 go into 2? And 8 really can't go into 2 because 2 is actually less than 8. So you give up on that. You go to the next digit and look at these two digits together. How many times can 8 go into 24? Now again, this is a very simple problem, so you know that it goes 3 times because 8 times 3 is 24. So you put the 3 on top, but you put it on top of the 4 because this is telling you that you're dividing into 24. Then what you do is you multiply 3 times 8 and you write the answer that you get down below, which is 24, and then you subtract these guys from one another. 24 minus 24 is 0. So because you figured out that it went 3 times, and because there's nothing left over, the answer that you write down is just 3. There's nothing else to write. 8 can go into 24 exactly 3 times. There's no remainder, there's nothing left over because when we did our subtraction at the end, we got a big fat 0. If we were to get something other than 0 here at the end of the problem, then we would have a remainder, we'd have something left over. But in this problem, we didn't. So let's say we have the problem, 25 divided by 5. How would you solve that? Well, you put the 25 underneath this division symbol and you put a 5 over here. You try to say, how many times can 5 go into 2? And it really can't go in. So you look at both of them together. How many times can 5 go into 25? So you think about your multiplication tables and you know that it goes 5 times and you write it over this digit. Then you multiply. 5 times 5 is 25. Okay, and then you subtract. Since these are the same number, it just gets 0, and the same sort of thing. There's no remainder left over. It can go 5 times together. And you knew that already. 25 divided by 5 you know is 5 because 5 times 5 is 25. There's nothing left over. All right, now let's go to a little bit more complicated problem. It's not going to be super complicated, but a little bit more, just to kind of get a little more, our feet wet a little bit more here. What if I gave you 180 divided by 6? Okay, some of you watching this might know what that is. Some of you probably don't know what that is. So most of the time you're not going to know the answer, so what you do is you do the steps. 180 divided by 6. This goes underneath that symbol and this goes on the outside. How many times can 6 go into 1? Really can't. How many times can 6 go into 18? Now you know that 6 times 3 is 18, so you put a 3 over the 8 there, and you multiply. 3 times 6 is 18. And then you subtract. 18 minus 18 is 0, so you put the 0 down there. Now, you can't just stop here, because see, there was an extra digit we didn't even touch in this problem. In these problems, we were done earlier because we didn't have as many digits, but this one we have a digit here. So what you do is you drag and drop this 0 down. You just drop that digit down there. And then you try to divide again. You try to see how many times can 6 go into 0. 6 can't go into 0 really at all. It just goes 0 times. So you put a 0 here because it can go 0 times into there. 0 times 6 gives you 0. You subtract, you get 0 again. You want to continue the process all the way up until you get down and you've dropped all of the digits down and you've divided everything and subtracted and you basically have nothing else left to do. So the answer to this problem is 30. The answer to this problem is 30. There's no remainder because we got a 0 at the end of the problem. Sometimes we're going to get something other than 0 at the end. Okay? So what if we had the problem, it's getting a little bit more complicated here. What if we had the problem 305 divided by 5? All right, so first we say, how many times can 5 go into 3? Can't really do that. How many times can 5 go into 30? Well, I know that 6 times 5 is 30, so I'm going to put a 6 up there. Okay? Then I multiply. 6 times 5 is 30. I drag it under here, subtract. I know that 30 minus 30 is just 0. Now I can't stop because I have this digit here I haven't touched, so I drag the next digit down and I put him down here. How many times can 5 go into 5? How many times can 5 divide into 5? You should know that that goes 1 time. So I write it up here and the next digit over. Then 1 times 5 is 5. I write it down here and I subtract. 5 minus 5 is 0. So now I'm looking to continue the problem, but there are no more digits to drop down. I've done my subtraction. I have everything finished. The answer to this problem is 61. There's no remainder because I got a 0 at the end. So 5 times 61 gives you 305. I'll leave that for you to check yourself. You can always check your problems because since we're dividing here, the opposite is multiplication. 5 times 61 should give you exactly what you have underneath there. Okay? Now, what if we have, over here, 320, and we're dividing into 320 the number 5. So we'd say, how many times can 5 go into 3? Really can't do that. How many times can 5 go into 32? Now we have to think a little bit. 5 times 5 is 25. That's too small. 5 times 6 is 30. That's pretty close. 5 times 7 is 35. That would be too big, so we can't put 7 up there. But 5 times 6 is 30, so we put that there. Now we multiply. 5 times 6, we get 30, and we subtract like this. Now, we know that we have 32, and we're subtracting 30 from it, so the answer that we get is a 2. Now, we're not done. We have this digit here we haven't touched. So after you subtract, you always drag the next one down, and you have a 0 there. Now we have 20. And we try to divide 5 into 20. How many times will 5 go into 20? It's going to go 4 times because 5 times 4 is 20, right? So we put 4 times, and we multiply. 5 times 4 is 20, and we subtract. We get a 0. Again, the remainder is 0. There's no more digits to drag down, so the answer we get is 64. So this is, again, going in an even number of times. 5 times 64 should give you exactly 320, and I suggest that you try that on your own. So far in all of the problems, we've done the long division, but we have had no remainder because we subtract at the end and we always got 0. That just means that it was an even number of times that the thing can go in there. There was nothing left over. It went in perfectly. Now in these problems, from here on out, we're going to have something we call a remainder. Let me show you what that is. Very simple thing to understand. Okay? So let's say we have 224 divided by 3. We want to do that division. All right, so we look at this and we say, how many times can 3 go into 2? It really can't go in, so then we expand and look at 22. How many times can 3 go into 22? Well, 6 times 3 is 18, and 3 times 7 is 21. That's as close as we can get. So we want to get as close as we can without going over. So we put a 7 there because 3 times 7 is 21, and we subtract. We know that 22 minus 21 gives us 1. Now we're not done because after we subtract, we always drop the next digit down. That is a 4. Now we look and say, how many times can 3 go into 14? Well, 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. That's too many times. So 3 times 4 is 12. We put a 4. Now we multiply. 4 times 3 is 12. And again, we subtract. 14 minus 12 is 2. All right, so we've done the subtraction. After the subtraction step, you always look and see, can you drop another digit down? Here we cannot drop another digit down. There's nothing else to drop. And I've done the subtraction, I've done the division. So the answer to this problem is 74 with a remainder of 2. What this means is that 3 can go into 224 74 times. 74 times. But after it goes 74 times, there's actually 2 left over. So if you actually got 224 candy bars on a table and tried to put them in groupings of 3, you took 3 over here and 3 over here and 3 over here and 3 over here and want to see how many groupings of 3 you had, you would have 74 groupings like that, but you couldn't do a 75th one because then you would just have an extra 2 candy bars left over on the table. And that's what a remainder is. It's what's left over after all of the whole number of divisions actually happen. Okay? Let's go on to the next problem. Let's say we have 495 divided by 7. 495 divided by 7. So we try to see, can 7 go into 4? No, it can't. Can 7 go into 49? Yes, it can. 7 times 7 is 49. So I do the multiplication, I get 49, and then I subtract. When I do the subtraction, I just get 0. After the subtraction, I always drag the next digit down. How many times can 7 go into 5? Well, it really can't, so I have to put a 0 here. I multiply and get a 0, and then I subtract. 5 minus 0 is again 5. So I've done subtracting again. I look for another digit to drag down, and I don't have one. So the answer I get here is 70 with a remainder of 5. And that means that 7 can go into this number 70 whole times, but you can't do it 71 times because there's actually 5 left over, and that's not enough to divide in another time. That's what's left over. That's what's left over. All right. Let's get into some more challenging problems. What if you have 1,782 divided by 6? You know, even if you have bigger and bigger digits, it's okay. It's the same process. Nothing changes in how you're actually doing the problem. It's just a little bit longer, okay? So we see, can 6 go into 1? Really can't. Can 6 go into 17? Of course it can. 6 times 3 is 18. That's too many. So we have to go down. 6 times 2 is 12. So we write the 12 here from the multiplication and we subtract. 17 minus 12 is 5. Now after our subtraction step, we drag the next digit down and we have 58. Now we try to see, can 6 go into 58? Well, 8 times 6 is 48 and 9 times 6 is actually 54. 9 times 6 is 54, so it can actually go 9 times. 9 times 6 you multiply and you get 54 and you again subtract. When you do this subtraction, you're just simply going to get 4. After the subtraction step, you always look at the very top of your problem and drag the next digit that you have down to the subtraction step. So we pulled the 2 down. How many times will 6 go into 42? It goes exactly 7 times because 7 times 6 is 42. When you subtract, you just get 0. Now at this step, we have done the division, we have no other digits to drag down, we've done the subtraction, so the answer is just simply 297. There's no remainder here for this one because we had a 0 there. All right, so the answer for that one was a 297. That's how many times the number 6 will go into 1,782. All right, we just have a couple more problems, just getting a little more practice. What if we have 8,741 and we're dividing by the number 6? So the first thing you say is, how many times can 6 go into 8? Well, that can actually go 1 time, so we put the 1 right there, and we multiply. 1 times 6 is 6, and we subtract. 8 minus 6 is 2. After the subtraction step, we go up to our problem, and we grab the next digit and put it down here. Then we try to divide again. How many times will 6 go into 27? 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 5 is 30. That's too many. So it only goes 4 times. We put the 4 there. 4 times 6 is 24. And we subtract. 27 minus 24 is just 3. After the subtraction step, we grab the next digit from the original problem and put it down here. All right? Now we say, how many times can 6 go into 34? Well, we know that 6 times 5 is 30, and 6 times 6 is 36. That's too many. So it can only go 5 times because 6 times 5 is 30, so we multiply. 6 times 5 is 30, and we subtract. This comes out to 4. After the subtraction, we go back up to our problem and grab the last digit that we have and bring it down here. And we have 41. All right, how many times can 6 go into 41? Well, 6 times 6 is 36, and 6 times 7 is 42. That's too many. So it can only go 6 times. The 6 times 6, we multiply, we get 36, and we subtract. 41 minus 36 is going to actually be 5. And so we've done the subtraction, we go back up to try to grab another digit, there's nothing there, so we can't do anything else, the problem's finished. The answer is 1,456 with a remainder of 5. Okay? Your remainder, by the way, should always be less than what you're dividing by, because your remainder is what's left over. You can't go divide in another time because there's this amount left over that's less than what you're dividing by. All right, so the remainder is always going to be less than the number sitting out in front here. You can see that over here. The remainder was 5. That's less than this. The remainder is 2. That's less than this, and so on. So the process is a little bit longer, but it's the same thing. All right, we only have one more, and then we're going to call it a day on this skill. Let's go ahead and do this last one. 5,734 divided by 8. So first we check and see, can 5 go into 8? And it can't. So we go to the next digit. Can 5 go into 57? Well, 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 7 is actually 56, and that's pretty close. 8 times 7 is 56. We multiply, we get 56, and we subtract. 57 minus 56 is just 1. After the subtraction step, we grab the next digit, bring it down. How many times will 8 go into 13? It can only go one time. 8 times 2 is 16, that's too many. So 8 times 1 is 8. We subtract here. 13 minus 8, I think you can convince yourself, is just 5. Now after the subtraction, we grab the next digit from the problem, bring it down. That's 54. All right, how many times can that go in there? 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 7 is 56. That's too many times. So it can only go 6 times. 8 times 6, you multiply, you get 48. And you subtract, and I think you can convince yourself, if you take 54 minus the 48, you know, some people can do this in their head and some people can't, so I'll just do this one for you here. You can't really take 8 from 4, so you can make this a 14, scratch this out and change it to a 4, and now you're just subtracting 14 minus 8. And so you do 14 minus 8, what you're going to get is 6. 4 minus 4 is 0, so we don't even have to write it. Now we're done with the subtraction. There's nothing else to drag down. That's the remainder. So the answer is 716, remainder of 6. Notice the remainder is always less than what you're dividing by. That's a really good check to make sure you're doing the right answer. 716, remainder of